Why can Rufus see the whispers in Final Fantasy VII Remake? This question right here has thrown me down a tunnel. This innocent little speculation has plunged me into the depths of Final Fantasy VII lore. I have, in my quest to answer this, learned things even I didn't know about the universe, things that have blown my mind, and without a doubt heightened my appreciation and curiosity for Rufus Shinra to levels I never thought possible. So you know what time it is, buckle on in, it's tinny hat time. Let's go. Rufus Shinra was freaking suave, absolutely badass. Yes, he also does look like a PS5 now, but his battle, movesets, the skills, and just generally the aura that they presented with Rufus in his small appearance at the end of this remake, I loved it, and I've always known he was a huge character, arguably almost as huge as Cloud when you really dissect his involvement, which we're going to do in this video. But let's go to the scene where he's strolling around the building. Whispers, they be swarming. Now quickly, I mean, there's loads of people have different interpretations. What exactly are the whispers? Because people even have different ways of interpreting and defining exactly what that is. Now me, I say that they are a manifestation of the life stream of a planet's defense system, obviously the harbinger of fate, whereby the planet can keep control of a certain track, its own destiny. It can keep events and people in place for whatever outcome, presumably its own survival, and that these things have actually been operating in the universe quite a while. They're sort of connected directly to the screams of the planet, the cries of the planet that we hear and have been hearing all throughout the series. A series that has played with the concept of destiny and fate, so I don't really see them as anything new. It's just that Square Enix are actually showing it to us in a very, very clear way.
Could it be the wind? Let me ask you, does the wind sound like 1,000 wailing souls? Listen. Can you hear them? Listen.
Now, of course, what adds to the complications is whenever we see these ghosts, they're not necessarily working for the events of the planet or our teammates, because of course Sephiroth has infiltrated them, so they may be working against. And even the notion of who gets to see them is quite confusing. Some do, some don't. I've kind of settled on the idea that it's anyone who has an involvement in destiny. If anyone has an active hand in altering it in any way and the ghosts need to appear to them or manipulate that specific individual, then they can appear to them. I've seen a few people say, oh, it's only if they've been in contact with Aerith, and that's why Cloud initially can see them. But of course that can't really be true, because Jesse and Biggs and Wedge, they see him and they never really come in contact with Aerith at this point of the game. And I stress that because now that we've got the possibility that time is obviously not as linear as we thought, this may be a Sephiroth from the future, though there's even freaking arguments for that. But later down the line, Biggs, Jesse and Wedge, they do meet Aerith in the live stream, so it's not exactly like it hasn't happened. But Rufus also really hasn't come in contact with Aerith, and for example Song, who definitely has ever since she was a child, cannot see the ghosts, and that's what makes this scene really curious. They switch it to Song's point of view, who can see nothing, and that's what really trips poor Rufy's brain clean that hell out. You see his entire demeanor change from that point on. For a dude who has long dreamed of this moment of taking his father down, of sitting on the throne of Shinra that he's long believed he was worthy of or entitled to, this entire moment is now completely lost in Rufus. He is completely distracted by this new appearance, and when we see him take the throne, he has a really disturbed, almost kind of pissed off look about him. Certainly not the kind of look of a man who's just achieved everything he's been dreaming of since he was literally 5. So what is the answer then, Pez? Just tell us. Okay, I'm gonna throw a few crazy curveballs, then I'm gonna give you all the information and let you decide. I'm resting on Rufus must either be infected with Jenova cells. He is pretty much the same as Cloud and Sephiroth and Genesis and the lot. He was experimented on at birth, and as you can see from this title or thumbnail, is directly being influenced by Sephiroth. unknowingly being used by him as part of his plan. My second option, and I've seen Sleepy's suggest this, Rufus is part Cetra. Oh, this is a freaking bold one, and this will tie very much into who exactly is Rufus's mother, and that question goes down a deep ass tunnel, or very simply my third one. He hasn't got anything miraculous in his blood, Ests or G cells or Cetra blood, he is simply Rufus Shinra, but that the concept of Shinra and the sons of Shinra also have a planetary inscribed role to play in the tale of FF7, that they are intrinsically important to the fate and destiny of the planet and of the timelines, and that this is the realization we're seeing through Rufus's eyes in seeing the ghosts when he takes the throne. Regardless, they all sound pretty crazy, but in this video and the roadmap that I'm going to present to you guys is going to show why it's not actually that out there, and that Rufus has actually this whole time been one of the most key players in the entire FF7 universe. So my journey started looking very closely around the scenes that Rufus appears in, and what I found was the place that Rufus starts seeing the ghosts is only a few scenes. In fact, like 20 minutes later from the Cloud and Rufus fight, when he definitely couldn't see the ghosts. Notice when he arrives on his helicopter, there's tons of the whispers flapping their plot ghosts that are metaphorically representing FF7 Puritans. They're all over the sky, and Rufus doesn't react. It's not like he wouldn't have seen them, they were freaking everywhere. So what happens between this scene and like 20-30 minutes later when all of a sudden he can? Well, as silly as this is gonna sound, they kill Wedge. Or at least it's very much alluded to with the smashing of glass, like they've thrown him out the window. Now, why would something so seemingly insignificant affect Rufus? Well, what we have to remember is the reason why Wedge is here is because of a whole chain event, a whole ripple effect of butterfly effects that have compounded and is slowly getting the timeline and the track of destiny out of hand. It's slowly going off the rails more and more, which eventually of course leads to the point where the ghost can't do anything, and that's what brings out the harbinger of fate to try to do a hard reset on it, something that Sephiroth definitely wanted to bring into being. Wedge is a byproduct of so much happening in this game, from Jesse getting pushed down the stairs to gaining grappling hooks after a mission that never happened in OG, to the plate collapsing slightly different, which switches up the damage on the signs between the ending and when we see it, even finding deep ground, and there's way more, but one of the really big ones is the other cell of Avalanche getting involved in the story. Now, they've teed a lot up in this game with the war with Wutai, and they've talked about how Wutai are kind of becoming aggressive back because they've got materia now. There was a little reveal in the game that Avalanche is providing Wutai with materia, something that enables them to fight back against Shinra. And the other cells of Avalanche is also why Wedge is at the building, in the Shinra building, and he gives the crew a different way to get off the building. They can now exit through the roof because Wedge contacted them for help. That means we get to the roof sooner, find President Shinra hanging off the side of the building, who was placed there differently by Sephiroth, I believe, and why we then get to see that really cool scene between Barrett and the president where he spares his life amazingly. He shows restraint so that he can force the president to reveal to the world exactly what Shinra's crimes have been, to absolve Avalanche's guilt, and to basically do something that would have totally altered the course of the game and the image and indeed the power that Shinra had. Now, when we go to someone like Rufus, this would be a huge no-no. Having his father expose the entire company would have jeopardized the throne that Rufus has been trying to inherit for the longest of time. So in that sense, for Rufus at least, it's kind of lucky that OG timeline Seth Jenova shows up, and I like the idea that this Sephiroth is just interacting as it normally does in the original. You know, it goes up there to kill the president, but suddenly finds itself being confronted by Barrett and stabs him back on instinct, which of course the ghosts have to undo because this ain't Barrett's destiny. He ain't fated to die here. But what's interesting is when the independent Sephiroth, or what we call the future Sephiroth, shows up and he makes off with the clones, it's very clear to me that the reason he leaves is when he hears the helicopters coming, that he scarpers from the scene, doing cleanup duty with the failed clones, mind you, at the same time, before Rufus can get there. Now, that's really important because this whole scene almost spiraled out until Sephiroth kind of put it all back into its place. Because what this means is that when Rufus appears, nothing seems to have really changed. Nothing really happens differently from the original. He more or less has the same dialogue, does the same battle, then zips off. So that's the main thing about Rufus seeing the ghosts, is he doesn't do anything different. So why can he see them? The huge caveat I would add, and as we start building up who exactly Rufus is, what we have to remember is whenever something is happening with Avalanche, you can more or less say Rufus is in the know. It is, after all, Rufus. He has for a long time been in the pockets or the funder of Avalanche. So more or less when Wedge contacted and gave them the information, that could easily have got back to Rufus. And I want to quickly add in here, yes, it is Rufus's helicopter that shoots down the Avalanche. You know, you might ask, why would he shoot down Avalanche if he's working with them? Well, this is kind of just the character Rufus is. He plays all sides and yet shows no allegiance to any of them. We've seen so many stories of the way that Rufus has used the Turks and got them on his side, while at the same time has also manipulated them for his own means. There was even a story about Veld, the previous leader of the Turks before Song. He actually convinces his father, President Shinra, not to disband the Turks when he catches them committing treason. He lets it keep the Turks around if they go out and they kill Elf and Veld, two huge before crisis characters, actually a father and daughter. I won't go too much into that, but Rufus is a character who knows how to get people on his side, to line up his chessboard of pawns to play with. You know, he's even betrayed Avalanche multiple times while working with them. He's been the secret financier of multiple organizations throughout the compilation of the series. But most importantly, and this is what I want to discuss in this video, he has time and time again been drawn into this story by these weird urges. That sounds weird. Not those kind of urges. Urges. The kind of urges that Cloud has. The kind of drawn weirdly, fatefully, subconsciously into scenarios, towards destinations and locations to play a role, and sometimes it even transcends his own understanding, his own actions. Something that, if you get a full scope of, and if I am able to explain it well in this video, makes a scene like this of Rufus suddenly seeing these ghosts something very, very easy to believe. Easy to believe that they're showing themselves to him, or he can see them because he has a role to play in the destiny of the planet. So I want to take you guys back. Let's mosey on back to 1997 and let's observe really what Rufus does in the original game. He acquires his father's throne just like he does in this game, and the moment he does he decide to do what President Shinra has always done, which is chill smoking cigars in the super sweet fat ass office that he has, lording over his bright shiny new empire like a dragon on its pile of gold? No, he doesn't. Rufus almost immediately gets drawn towards tracking down Sephiroth. Now, he's of course not doing it because he had any love for his father. He's not trying to track down his father's killer to bring about justice. Not at all. In fact, if he did hunt down Sephiroth, he'd probably shake the man's hand for doing something that Rufus has been plotting and planning so many times over the series. That he's always believed he's been right for the throne and he could get everything done in a more efficient way than his dad, who, needless to say, though raised Rufus to be the heir to the Shinra throne, did nothing but pretty much torment him, belittle him, berate him, and yeah, more or less fucked up his childhood. Childhood traumas and issues definitely plays for Rufus. And I think that's in part why he builds up this idea of once his dad is gone and he'll take the throne, that it'll be this complete resolution to all of the dreams that he's long looked for. And yet, as dreams often are, once you get there, I think Rufus finds it wasn't the all-encompassing fulfillment he expected it to be. But what I also think he realizes in this scene is that he's kind of been set up by his father, that his origins, that his role in the story has pretty much been preordained. And for a guy like Rufus, who loathes any thought of him being controlled and not the controller. That is something that Rufus cannot tolerate. And that's why in OG, I believe he, again, doesn't really take interest in the throne, and he immediately goes on this wild venture to hunt down Sephiroth. And notice he pretty much does everything Cloud does. Cloud, who is a failed experiment, someone who has S cells in his body, and this is where I want to talk about Hojo. He's called it the reunion theory for the longest of times in this game. The reunion theory being that all beings with S cells or cells of Jenova will always try to reunite, will always travel and journey across long distances to return to the source, which is Jenova. You know, even Aerith in the game says the source of everything. And this feeling, this pull, this urge is so strong and so enticing. In fact, even Cloud in the game, he calls it deep urge that is both incredibly wicked and cruel. In fact, Cloud gets so consumed by it that when he meets Hojo, he actually begs him to give him a tattoo, begs him to make him a part of his reunion experiment. At this point, Cloud is completely willing to give up everything that is Cloud's strife. He believes that as the human Cloud, he has failed in every aspect. He apologizes to Tifa. He just wants everything, the hurt, the pain, the disappointment, the despair that is the image of himself that he's built as Cloud. He wants it all gone. And that urge is largely what's driven Cloud across these continents, even at times not knowing where he was going, but so too has it for Rufus. After all, whose boat was it to Costa del Sol that the crew climbed aboard? Rufus's, who we even see reprimands Heidegger for not getting a helicopter on time, for not getting him the long distance airship that he needs, which is why he then goes to Rocket Town and tries to nick Cid's. He gets that because he wants to try to head to the Temple of the Ancients. That's why he's got Cait Sith infiltrated in the system to get him the keystone. Rufus definitely uses the Turks and their espionage to locate and track where Sephiroth is, but there's even scenes where it seems like that can only go so far. At the Icicle Inn region, Eleanor and the Turks, that they try to stop Cloud, and Eleanor actually gives Cloud. Oh, and he just noticed this scene. Look, she gives him a gut punch and it actually floors Cloud. A single punch. Cloud the Mako enhanced soldier. How freaking hard does this girl hit? But of course the Turks then lose Cloud when he goes snowboarding down the mountain, and then they go travelling to the northern crater, or what was once known as Null's Pole. Now where they went in this huge area, no one would have really been able to have navigated. Cait Sith is no longer betraying the location of Avalanche, so I've considered this. As to the reason why this next scene happens, out of nowhere, at the most pivotal location in the game, Sephiroth's body, the northern crater, the location of Jenova, the place where the Cetra once settled, and even against the planet's encouragement to leave it, they found themselves so drawn to that location that, yeah, again, even when the planet said to leave, they didn't. And that was when Jenova started disguising itself as their family and loved ones and turned them crazy. So to find Rufus himself personally suddenly showing up in this scene with no other context other than found ya, pretty much, that seems really strange to me. Scarlet, she wants to hightail it the hell out of there, even though there's juicy materia everywhere. And this is the place where Hojo has also come along with Rufus, specifically to observe the reunion happen. This is the place where all of Hojo's theories and thesis gets proven in his mind correct. That all beings with S cells would be drawn to this place. Well, specifically, Hojo actually thought it would be Midgar, the location of Jenova, but that is of course then flipped because it's Sephiroth's will. That will that Cloud was describing as terribly deep, wicked and cruel, it was Sephiroth. So my question is, what led Rufus here? It could have been Turk espionage, you know, they might have also watched the tapes with Garth and known about what Founder called the Null's Pole. I think they could show this kind of stuff really cool in like the VR. I think the VR machine is a very curious insertion into the remake. This machine that can be directly hijacked and funneled memories and visions of things from the live stream really makes me question what Shinra has potentially seen through that VR machine that could lead to their actions and Rufus's going forward in this remake. But could it also have potentially been a strong urge like the ones that drew the Cetra there? Or is it the urge that comes from Cloud and all the failed clones that find themselves inexplicably being drawn to that location? I know there's the old adage of the simplest explanation is probably the correct one, but I don't think that really applies with Final Fantasy VII, because look at what else Rufus does in the series. He is the one in Advent Children who has Jenova's body when Kadaj is trying to do just that, another reunion. In fact, reunion, I didn't know until scripting this video, was going to be the title of Advent Children. Tetsuya Nomura was going to make the film's subtitle, Reunion. He literally hides Jenova right under the nose of the remnants and then comes out with that famous line, "A good son would have noticed," which is hilariously ironic coming from a guy who spent most of his life trying to kill his dad. But nevertheless, Rufus tries to stop this reunion, but in having the Jenova cells, Kadaj does manage to get hold of it, and he brings about another reunion. So in trying to stop it, he enables it. This happens again in Dirge of Cerberus, the World Regenesis organization, a huge organization behind the game that is actually set up by Reeve. They actually stumble across Hojo's synaptic network and they reactivate it, which allows Hojo's fragments to reform and take control of Weiss the Immaculate. While he's in that form in the synaptic net drive, Hojo tells Vincent that he considers his digital reformation a quote-unquote Neo reunion. Oh, no. Now you're asking what's that got to do with Rufus? Well, the one funding the World Regenesis organization, yep, you guessed it, it's Rufus. Which means he once again, inadvertently, enables a reunion to happen. Even the final reunion between Cloud and Sephiroth in the final meteor, in the final crater area, is directly because of Rufus. It's his building of the Sister Ray on top of Midgar, which fires the beam that takes out Diamond Weapon and the barrier surrounding the northern crater, which, now even that right there, I don't think we give Rufus enough credit for. Cloud and the gang, they're not the ones who kill the weapons, it's freaking Rufus. It's Rufus who is even the one getting huge materia to come up with a plan to blow up Meteor. He's the one who actually gets Cloud and the gang access to Sephiroth in the crater. Without him, none of that would have been able to happen. He is the enabler of reunions. He, for all intents and purposes, is a inadvertent, dark, shadowy kind of hero figure. He isn't pointlessly malevolent or violent or aggressive. Even when he executes Tifa and Barrett, that wasn't even his plan originally. The reason he captured those two and goes to execute them is in the hope that Cloud will show up to save them. Why? Because he's basically pursuing the same path as Cloud. He's drawn to the same places he is. Cloud and Rufus follow the same direction, and it isn't the case that they both know where they're going. The same as Aerith didn't know exactly where she had to go or what her goal was when she went to the City of the Ancients. She said she was being drawn by a feeling, and I theorize that whether he's got S cells or Cetra blood within him, the one thing that he is the reunion enabler. And when we look at the remake and the reunion between Cloud and Sephiroth and the throwdown they have at the edge of creation, look who it cuts to immediately afterwards. Rufus, and I see that as very intentional from Square Enix. I see it as an acknowledgement of the weird role that he's always played. He's always been sort of the connective tissue between Cloud and Sephiroth, neither the good guy nor the bad. He walks the moral grey between, and is in some instances a hero, sometimes a facilitator. And it's quite possible that Rufus seeing these ghosts in the remake is happening because he is changing in some way his view from the OG story. Regardless, I definitely think the role he plays is being instinctively led within him, whether that's been plot ghosts or whether that's again because he has some sort of cellular genetic heritage we're not aware of. Who freaking knows which of those it could be, but what I'm proposing is Rufus has the same instinct within him, and that is only when he takes his father's throne, becomes empowered to actually act on his course, on his destiny. Before he's actually the president of the company, he's just naively like an angsty teenager trying to fuck over his parents. It's when he becomes president that his role in the planet's fate comes to fruition. And yeah, I admit, while none of this yet is very paranormal and out there to imply some sort of hidden ancestry or mother, which I'll quickly talk about. Well, we've never known who Rufus's mother is. We kind of know that whoever she was important to the president, because after Rufus gets busted on his first assassination attempt of his dad, the president locks him indefinitely away in a jail overwatched by Song and the Turks. And Rufus actually manages to get out by typing in the passcode of his mum's birthday, a passcode set by the president. So it kind of implies there is maybe some sort of affection there. The idea that he is part Cetra or potentially a son of Ifauna came from the idea of Sleepeasy, that Ifauna, of course, before met Ghast, was flitting around the Shinra headquarters. Did her and the president hook up? I highly doubt that they'd make that the case, because then Aerith and Rufus would be brother and sister. But Ifauna isn't the only route where Rufus is able to have part Cetra blood. After all, we even have to pull into question if Rufus is really President Shinra's son. I imagine he is. The president wouldn't give his throne to someone who wasn't really his. But the point being that even after Rufus tried to betray the president reacts by simply saying, foolish boy, he was going to take the throne anyway. He doesn't punish his son in any way for it and just maintains that he's going to become the heir. And for a man who in the remake admitted himself that there is no room for guilt or sentiment in his mindset, I can't see the reason why the president did this was out of any kind of sentimental affection for his son. We have actually known that the president has had many sons that he hasn't given a shit about. And it all makes me suspicious that the president actually sees Rufus as an invaluable resource, as a product he has to keep around that is pivotal towards what is the president's ultimate goal, Neo Midgar, of finding the promised land. A predetermined destiny that he has kept Rufus around for, that Rufus, only upon seeing the ghosts and taking that throne, realizes his father is still having an influence. And his was gonna get crazy. So here we go, guys. Why do I think he might have S cells? Why he might actually be a product of Jenova? Well, in the remake, they moved his age to 30. He was 25 all the way up until this point at the start of the game. So why have they aged Rufus 5 years older? You know, you don't really pointlessly change an age in the game unless it has a meaning. So off I went down the rabbit hole onto the FF7 timeline, and based on him being 30, that means his new age is 1977 in the game. So if anyone who doesn't know, 0007 to 8 is the game timeline, like 7 and 8. The 0 point being where the timeline essentially resets. So by that logic, his original birth date was 1982. Which just so happened to be the same year that Hojo convinced Lucretia to use their unborn child as a test subject for Project S. That was when Sephiroth was decided upon. Now that they've moved him back 5 years, 1977, that is the same year that Jenova was discovered. Woo! That is a very significant year. Quote, Shinra scientists led by Professor Ghast discover Jenova and label her a Cetra. The Jenova project begins soon after with the goal of creating a human with the powers of a Cetra. This is where everything begins. The S project, the G project. Why would you move Rufus's date to such a significant point? And the expeditions had been happening there because President Shin was already obsessed with the Promised Land. He was following the trail of the Northern Crater. So upon finding it, would it be that out there to say that he immediately wanted to try to create a test subject that was Cetra? That Sephiroth wasn't the first one to be made, essentially putting a half-blood, half-human Cetra on the throne. Now, I know what some of you are going to say, well, obviously, wouldn't Rufus be hearing the voice of the planet? Wouldn't he also have green eyes? Well, Rufus's eyes, they're kind of bluish-greeny in this, but one of the other things that I really found weird to think about is going to the Northern Crater at that point in the timeline. Was that also when they must have found Ifauna? No, because the story really just plays off that there's this pure blood Cetra, hanging around the Shinra office, but we don't know how she gets there. We don't know how long she was there before her and Ghast hooked it up and made a wee little Aerith. And it's as I've been thinking about where Fauna came from that my mind kind of got twisted, because if she is a pure blood Cetra, then that of course means both her parents were pure blood. And by that logic, and legitimately guys, I dived into freaking science on this. I dove into MVP science. No, that's not most valuable player. No, MVP, minimal viable population. This is the minimal number of a species that you need for it to be able to continue when you factor out things like being inbred. I hope that Ifauna, whoever her parents were, that they weren't bro and sister. So there must have been like a small tribe of them. A small tribe of Cetra that have been surviving for 2,000 years, completely under the radar of freaking Shinra. And just looking at the numbers, and I know this is a fantasy game and Square haven't even thought about it, but what I found by reading it is for a single species to last that long, at least 4,169 unique individuals. Taking in trends of insularity, surviving genetic bottlenecking, genetic factors, loads of randomized events, and even just the odds of a reasonably well-balanced male to female ratio being born. I think there was one pretty extinct bird in Australia that unfortunately got down to like the last 20 and then all of them happened to be male. It was like a 0.002% chance of happening, but nature can be a bitch at times, and the point I'm making is there had to have been quite a significant number of Cetra surviving into modern times, completely under the radar of Shinra. And when I look at where that location is, it had to have been, of course, the Forgotten Capital, the ancient city, and that entire region that is in the northern snowy area surrounding the crater. So is it any surprise that when Ifauna recounts the story of it, she seems personally saddened by it? It had to have been where she came from, especially when this region was the one area that Ifauna chose to hide Aerith. If it was on that expedition that they discovered Ifauna, my question is, was it really the case that after 2,000 years, just as Shinra find Ifauna, she literally happens to be the very last one? Like the chances of that are so freaking small. What, both her pure-blooded parents were gone? Is she literally the only one left? Or were there others? And my question being is, could it have been at that point that Shinra scientists found Jenova, same year that Rufus happened to become the son of President Shinra? Maybe Shinra stole one of the Cetra children, one other surviving Cetra. Maybe he abducted a baby of his own, or crossbred one with the cellular information, the makeup, which very horrifically in the remake, Hojo told Aerith very nicely he'd kept every inch of Ifauna, the bones, the skin, the giblets, the whole freaking lot, and that you could come look at her mum under a microscope. The fact that Aerith's face did not break in this scene until the very end after Hojo goes, that is such a testament to this girl's strength. Just no point to this theory video, I just wanted to throw it in. So could Rufus be a magic North Pole baby? Maybe he is something that was taken from or a byproduct of that expedition which Square Enix have felt for some reason the need to move his birth date to. But I don't know how this is all going to sound. Very slim, overthought, coincidental kind of evidence that I'm slopping together. If we're going to really substantiate that there's something magical, rare, or different about Rufus, then where's the weird stories? Where's the weird childhood tales? One of the very weird ones I happened upon. You know when Rufus Shinra survives the diamond weapon attack, the reason for that is because there's a trapdoor beneath the president's desk. Well, that trapdoor right there is only in place because Rufus, when he was 5 years old, said to his father, "Where's the escape route?" This is word for word. Rufus pretended to show his interest while he did his best to read something from the plans. He had to make his father praise how clever he was, but he couldn't read anything and only said what was on his mind. Where's the escape route? His father couldn't understand what Rufus was thinking. This goes on where little Rufus apologizes for the idea. President Shinra says why, and then actually calls him an idiot, like a simple-minded person, for apologizing for the random sporadic idea that came to his mind. And because of that, what a fucking arsehole, President Shinra actually labeled the button L for loser. L for loser. And it wasn't until that moment when he took cover under the desk that he saw the button. He didn't even know his father had actually built that escape route because of what he said, weirdly, when he was 5 years old. If that doesn't sound marginally similar to Aerith, you know, when she's painting all of the mural on her wall, like she's tapping into this unconscious state. Did Rufus, when he was young, preempt in some way his own death and inadvertently blurted out the very escape route that would save him when he was older? If so, then Rufus has been a product of destiny for a very long time. I wouldn't even be surprised if they play off in this remake that he was a child of destiny and that President Shinra has always known that. Because for as crazy it is for young Rufus to say that, what's even wilder is that President Shinra actually builds it. Even though by his own words he says he's on floor 70, there's absolutely no need, it's a stupid idea, he still does it. That makes me question, what does President Shinra know about his son Rufus that we don't know? That he would take a young boy's intuitive wild ramblings as serious as, say, the scientist did the wall scribblings of Aerith. Anyway, we then see in a story, it's on the way to a smile, episode Shinra. After he presses that button, he goes flying down a chute and he ends up in a room that's just this like 5x5 blank white room. It has a bed in the corner that someone must have stayed at some point, he theorized, but not for a very long time. There's a wardrobe, a closet for clothes. He ends up just trapped in this room for a really long time. Again, he tries to figure out the passcode, tries his mum's birthday, it doesn't work. Eventually it's his birthday that works. But it seems really weird to me there's this other like little room that leads directly to the president's office when it's essentially like a laboratory room. And with Rufus's passcode, birthday being the passcode, it again gives me the vibe that President viewed his son as like a lab experiment. This same episode, Shinra then goes on to explain a whole load of other crazy stuff, like how it was that Edge was built. Edge was actually an on-the-fly Rufus idea because a bunch of guys come and grab him in calm, he's injured from the fall down the chute, he breaks his ribs. And to basically talk silver tongue his way out of a clean execution, he convinces the people at Calm that all of the refugees from Midgar are going to flood the city and screw him over unless they let him plan the building of Edge for them, Edge being the city and Advent children. The story continues on and we see a real arc with Rufus during this point. It's post FF7 Meteor Fall and he meets a doctor called Killmeister who is trying to investigate the stigma. He's trying to find a cure for it. During this time we see Rufus talking about things like karma, karmic debt, the regrets that he has, how he can find a way to help them find a cure. I mean, even the cliff resort that we find, the hospital place. The sign actually says healing, and in this quote here, when Reno Rude asks what the healing means, Rufus says it means to heal the world. And this line summarizes Rufus completely, because while he'll do some things for good, he'll always have that dark side. Our methods may be a bit reckless, but we are the Shinra Company. It won't surprise anyone. Rufus's voice tingled with excitement. Floor! When I read all of this story, it really made me realize that what Advent Children Rufus was saying about actually trying to find a redemption, and that was genuine. He wasn't bullshitting. In fact, the hospital he stays at was initially for elderly patients. It was like an old people's home, and the old people used to call Rufus and the people he met their little devils. The little devils, because they were like this ragtag gang of naughty kids, like plotting stuff, but actually getting on really well. He says how strangers saw their behaviour as little children playing make-believe, pretending they had a company. Little children that had nothing good waiting for them if they returned home, and in a way, it was as if they were homeless little children out playing to their heart's content. Damn, that is a powerful arc, especially for someone who all his trauma, all of the misguided wrongdoings that he committed were all programmed into him as a child from a shitty, traumatic childhood, and to see him now essentially re-experiencing a childhood, reconnecting with, as the title says, Advent children. He is almost in a way being reborn himself, and when I combine all that together, that's what screams, is there Cetra blood in this guy? But then on the flip side, and this is why I think maybe Sephiroth is simply manipulating, the same way Sephiroth thought he was a Cetra, Rufus is exactly the same, and we went into the colour schemes of the yellow and the purple flowers. Rufus's coin is purple, and all of that is symbolic of a path of fear and domination and control, exactly the same corrupting colour as Sephiroth. Because in this exact same story, when he's helping the Doctor kill Meister, trying to find a geostigma cure, he nearly drowns in a cave, and rather than try to save himself, he actually drags the nearly starved individuals trapped in the cave with him onto like this wooden pallet to try to keep them afloat. Like legit, the chips are freaking down and Rufus goes full freaking hero mode to save them, and he actually sinks under the water, and it's then that this piece of black swirly stuff comes through the water towards him, which we know is of course Jenova's cellular material. He says it felt as if someone had called out to him, but there was no one around that could have had the strength left to do so. He looked around the water, he sees the black shape, it moved as it was live. Frightened, Rufus started to splash the water in an effort to force it away. He doesn't, and it actually then crawls into his ear, which later gives him the geostigma. But that point about something calling out to him, Sephiroth directly reached out to Rufus the exact same way that Kadaj reaches out to Rufus. They are drawn to him and the role and power that he has, that they are trying to manipulate in the game. So flashing back to the remake, you know, when you see Sephiroth scarpering off with the clones just as Rufus's chopper is showing up, it just emphasizes even more the pivotal role that this guy has to play in the story. Now, I've done loads of theory videos. Here are some of the ones that I've done that have talked down a lot of these lines in terms of what Sephiroth's plan is, Aerith's plan. In my recent one, I said I believe even Hojo is trying to recreate a god, both a black and a white wing. You know, the ultimate being that is connected to the lifeblood of the Cetra and the Promised Land and the water, while also the power and strength of what the S-Cells and Jenova offers. A combination of both. Well, I only just found this interview from Kitase this March of this year, where he actually explained that the word Shinra derives from the word myth in Japanese, because Shinra was about becoming God and controlling everything. Which is, of course, controlling everything and becoming God is directly synonymous with what Sephiroth is trying to accomplish. And that's why I think whether he has SL in him or he has part Cetra in him, they're not even necessarily required. Just the idea that, you know, things like Loveless, like the War of the Beasts, that Shinra are a prophesized necessity in this story. And that by default they have something, I guess, almost just as powerful in terms of what draws Rufus and President and all the other sons of Shinra, which I'll get into in a moment. They are all drawn just as powerfully as Cloud is to his destination, as Aerith is to hers. And yeah, those other sons, I'll quickly go through them. So there's Lazard. He was discovered in Crisis Core to be an illegitimate bastard son of President Shinra. And this boy, he grew up in the slums. He grew up poor, yet he works his way to the head of the soldier division. Ends up doing all this sneaky behind the scenes funding and manipulating, just like Rufus does for the Wutai War, for the Genesis copies that come to fight. He even funds Hollander for the research that he's trying to do, which is again reunion theory based. Like Hollander tries to extract stuff from Cloud, he's following the same reunion ideology. The guy is just drawn to it. He becomes, you know, the only human Angeal copy in existence, which sparks people to think that Angeal is roaming around Nibelheim. And then the other one, and this is where it's going to get a little bit weird, the other guy, and I only just discovered who this guy even is, Evan Townsend. He's another illegitimate son, and this is all the kids are all right stuff. He's the main character you follow in it, and he's basically a private detective living in Edge. The name of his agency is actually Mirel's, which is named after, Mirel from the remake, Kyrie's mum, because Kyrie and Leslie both work for Evan Townsend. And what you'll quickly find is, just like Rufus, just like Cloud, Evan is drawn into all of these different locations almost on pure instinct. He meets Cloud when he calls the Strife delivery service trying to find fuel. He speaks to Tifa, they go explore Nibelheim. And so much happens. I can't go into all this video between this guy Evan, Kyrie and Leslie, but it eventually leads to them actually finding a piece of Jenova's cellular material. Kadaj actually fights them. Evan has to throw a piece of Jenova into the live stream to try to get rid of Kadaj, and Evan is Primarily while he's going through all of this, he's trying to find his mum, a woman called Annette, who was once a secretary for President Shinra. That's why he's another illegitimate bastard child. It's kind of also revealed that Rufus knows about Evan and Lazard, because when Evan and Rufus meets, he says it's not the only illegitimate half-brother he's met. So yeah, President Shinra is a bit of a freaking dog, and the women that he meets and the children that he has, the idea that all of these sons could be more than what they seem is Annette wasn't just the secretary of President Shinra. She was actually a scientist who worked for a week at the Nibelheim mansion on the experiments. She was directly involved in the place where unborn fetuses were being injected with stuff. And this takes a lot for Evan to unfold, because Annette never said anything, because for revealing anything about what happened in that mansion was the penalty of death. And Evan and Kyrie, eventually they reach the northern crater and they find all these dead bodies garbed in black robes, and amongst them, Evan finds his mother Annette. Upon checking her body, he finds some letters she was carrying, and in one of them is the piece of Jenova. So Evan's mum, who is directly connected to Rufus, was a failed clone. In fact, Kadaj actually even inhabits her body to torment and try to fight Evan. He gets like this shoulder injury, which weirdly, somehow Annette was saving money and gave Evan the money when he was young, knowing that in the future he would need it for a surgery of some sort. And Kadaj actually then later down the line stabs Evan and he has to go into surgery. I know it all sounds really freaking weird, but it kind of meets all the same themes as what we've been discussing with Rufus. We've got a son of Shinra, and weirdly enough, this one, Evan, is actually described to be most alike to Rufus in appearance. Hell, maybe Annette is Rufus's mum. And just like with the trapdoor, he's inherited this ability to kind of intuit the future. It certainly emphasizes the kind of women that President Shinra has had these children with, ones associated with biological fetus programs. And then once again, just like Lazard as well, we've got the reunion aspect. Evan is directly involved in kind of both stopping and not stopping a reunion happening. Hell, if Rufus really does have this ability, that's where the deep kind of lines like he came out with Advent Children, it really makes me start rethinking these kind of comments that Rufus leaves.
As long as you exist, the nightmares will come again and again.
The life stream courses through our world, ever flowing between the edge of life and death. If that cycle is the very truth of life, then history too will inevitably repeat itself. Go on, bring your Jenovas and your Sephiroths. Cause trouble till your heart's content. We'll do as life mandates. We promise. We won't let you win, we'll stop you.
Is it really that hard to believe when you see stuff like that, that Rufus has an intimate understanding and role to play in this repeating remake, requel, muck sneakquel? If this series going forward is going to be about boundless, terrifying freedom and our characters making new choices that are going to forever alter, as Aerith said, themselves and the course of the FF7 events, that Rufus also has to play a part in that change. And this may seem like I'm grasping from really thin universal stuff, but by the merit that Kyrie is in this game, Leslie is massively in this game. I mean, damn, Leslie almost had an entire chapter all for himself, searching for his wife, who I only just found out her name is Merle. Yep, Merle, and apparently they do meet back up and have kids later down the line. Evan and Kyrie pretty much become a couple, and look at how prominently the theme of reunion even played with that. The pendant that Evan has of his wife symbolized just that. We have Tifa talking about reunion, Aerith talking about it. Of course, it's still going to play a huge role for Sephiroth, Jenova, and Hojo. And frankly, while I've not even covered a fraction of all that there is to cover, the one thing I've repeatedly found is that all reunion roads in some way lead back to Rufus. Rufus and what the Shinras represent and exactly what that's going to be. Despite all this stuff I've laid up, I still have no clue. And that's why I'm going to throw a poll in the top corner. What do you feel is most likely going to be the big reveal on Rufus? Do you think he's an experiment, part Cetra, Or hell, something entirely new. I'm using the term reunion enabler. Under the blanket that Rufus has some sort of powers within him, something psychic, something that is a supernatural phenomena in nature, and that's why Rufus can see the ghosts. Path entwined in destiny that Rufus only begins to step onto once his father is out the way. That's when his journey begins. That's when he starts learning about the world, how it operates, his role within it. And more importantly, that's when we start seeing Rufus heal as an individual from childhood traumas, and the desire to heal and mend the world starts to manifest within him. Oh boy! Our main protagonists all very much rely on Rufus to be able to do what they do in the game, and even like the Turks, like Song, Reno and Rude, even their redemption arcs for what is the pretty horrific crimes they commit in this first part of the remake. They too are dependent on Rufus, and that's why in an early video I said, you know, if Neo Midgar happens to become the promised land like I hoped in my level 10 God Cloud theory, I hope that whatever the new world, the new future that this remake is obviously geared towards carving out, I hope that Rufus gets his position as a leader in this new world consolidated, because deep down there is a decent dude in there. And I'm going to leave you off on one last crazy detail that I think consolidates more than anything that Rufus is drawn into this journey the same way as Cloud, because even the very day that Rufus decides to go on a long-term business trip, and this is at the timeline of December 0000, so yes, the exact time of the timeline resetting in the universe. This day in December is the day that Rufus assumes the position of Vice President of Shinra Electric Power Company. And due to confidential information that to this day we still don't know about, he goes off the scene for 2 years. When he later returns in January 003, that is the day he informs Avalanche that the Turks are going to attack their headquarters in Wutai. It's also the time he meets the real elf, who is a really badass character, an Avalanche leader. So in that time that Rufus went away, he suddenly came up with this huge plan to use Avalanche for his goal. So in that time, that's when he formed the really nuanced role that he has with Avalanche. Something that, as we've discussed in the OG story, pretty much later determines his destiny, as well as Cloud and the crew's. Now, why is that weird? That during that undisclosed confidential trip away, he undertakes a plan that would later define his very future? Well, because the same date on December 000 is the same day Cloud decides to join Soldier. That is the day that Tifa and Cloud sit at the water tower. The day that Cloud has the balls for the first time to talk to Tifa and fully commits and decides to go to Soldier. It's weird, man. It's weird. It's the same freaking month. There's a lot of weird, crazy shit I can overlook, but both of these characters getting the exact same urge to suddenly go off and do something that would later lead to their destinies on the exact month? Come now. Yeah, at this point, I wouldn't even be surprised if Cloud and Rufus are half brothers. I mean, I really wouldn't be freaking surprised. When you look at all these crazy, weird relationships that Shinra has had and sired or not sired, and the stuff he's been involved in, the way that these timelines work, and indeed even the way that Square Enix have shifted around to make it work, it all just screams teeing up for something major. And that is why, while Rufus only appeared for a small time, I am super freaking curious. I'm titillated to the T on what the hell they're going to do with this guy. Let me know what possibilities you gravitate towards or are kind of in favor of, and indeed any other juicy details that I've missed off, let us know. Thanks so much for watching another long ass video. I actually intended this video to be about 10 minutes. Legit. I thought I was just going to do a small little curious vid on Rufus, but 6 hours of road mapping later, here we are. Until the next video, Kupo!